funny whenever you hear, I always go back to that when people talk about influences, right? Who were your influences? And when you listen, or sorry, when you watch, you know, real sort of creative, like great creative types talk, you can see them sort of internally roll their eyes because the answer is every single thing I've ever heard
Right.
has
Yeah, I
influenced me.
agree. I
Everything,
agree.
everything influences me. And I take what I like and I leave what I don't. And that's, you know what I mean? So like I said, that's your fumes. The fumes are going in and they're affecting,
Right.
they're rewiring your brain, right? A little bit. So
And then it's also worth noting that like Full Moon Fever was just like a huge record
yeah.
in this exact era. Like, cause that's where I first was introduced to Tom Petty. And I remember Free Fallin' just being like truly inescapable.
Yeah.
Like just truly like I remember I would like ask my mom to take me to the mall. On the way to the mall, we'd have to listen to the radio. We would hear Free Fallin'. Then at the mall, they would play Free Fallin'. Then I would come home and turn on the TV and I would see the Free Fallin' music video in which he's playing guitar in a mall.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like, you know, and then like just as that was dying down, like just as the whole sort of cultural phenomenon of Full Moon Fever had peaked, then Jerry Maguire came out. And
Yeah.
in that movie, there's this huge moment where he hears Free Fallin' and he like starts pounding the steering wheel. And like just as that was like kind of over, it's like not over anymore.
It spiked again. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I like the song and I like Tom Petty and I also remember Wildflowers coming and seeing that video
Yeah.
and like being sort of like amazed in the music video when the woman starts singing for him and being like, whoa, I've never seen anything like that before. I mean, I was like 6 years old or something.
Yeah.
So all that stuff sort of came and went by. And like, even though I like Tom Petty, it was so in the culture that I almost like did not feel the need to go get those CDs. Like I just felt like I was hearing them right and left. Like it felt a little bit silly to me that at the end of the day, I would need to then put on Free Falling and listen to it on headphones because I've like heard it 1,000 times already. That's not to say I was over. It's not that I disliked it. It's just I felt like I listened to the radio and watched so much MTV that it was just like they gave it to you.
But it's that saturation point, right? And it's you know, when people talk about songs that are overplayed, and you sort of have to detach and think, well, first of all, if they're overplayed, they're getting played because they're really good songs.
Yes.
And when you go back again and you listen to some of these things, like, you know, Listen to a Heart, which we're going to get into, it's easy to sort of think, well, I've heard that a million times. It's a great pop song. But when you go back and really listen to it, it's like, this is a really, really brilliantly written song. That's why they've got the longevity and that's why people still love them. Free Fall is another example of The Waiting. I mean, these are three of the most perfect pop songs ever written by anyone.
Yeah.
And that's why they're still around and that's why they're timeless.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And so it was, I don't think I would have really like self-identified as a Tom Petty fan.
Yeah.
Or like felt like someone who was like eligible to go on the Tom Petty podcast until I was like seriously trying to become a singer into my 20s after like 15 years of identifying as just a guitar player. And thinking I was in bands where like we had a lead singer and I was the lead guitar player. I sort of grew up thinking that I was going to be like the guy behind the guy. Like you have Axl and then you have Slash.
Yeah.
And you have Mick and then you have Keith, right? You have David Lee Roth and then you have Eddie. Like I always related more to the guy with the mystique. I was like, that's perfect. I'll just be that. Yeah. I was in bands as that. I understood who I was as that. And then those bands broke up and I made the sort of terrifying switch to becoming a singer and caring and trying to own that identity. And this was when I went from being like a sort of admirer of Tom Petty who had grown up hearing him and had a couple CDs and liked it just fine to recognizing a sort of deeper specialness in Tom Petty and understanding him on a deeper level and becoming a bigger fan and then reaching a point where I could feel like, you know, there's only going to be one cover song on my album and it's going to be the guy I'm going to cover is Tom Petty. It was him as a vocalist and me getting a sort of new interest and sensitivity to vocalists and being a vocalist that was the transformation for me.
Well, it's funny because I don't think he does get enough. I mean, I've talked about this with so many people, but I don't think he does get enough love as well, either a rhythm guitarist or as a singer. Because he's the songwriter, he's brilliant with words and everything else. But people
Uh-huh.
sort of sometimes want to lump him in with the Dylan style because he's got it. He can turn that on when he needs it. He's
Yes.
got so many different looks. This is where I always get into this with I'm talking about Petty versus Springsteen. Petty's
Uh-huh.
got more modes. He's got different things that he can do with his voice and different ways that he can throw it around a melody. Where not a lot of people have that. Where you can, you think about the vocal in Spike, it's completely. You would think that's a different singer than the guy in Free Falling, or
Uh-huh.
the voice he puts on in US 41 from Mojo is completely different. Again, he's got all these different things that he can do depending on what character he's playing or what the song needs.
Yes, yes. And there's also like there's like a misery that he there's like a specific type of misery that is like always on the edge with Tom Petty.
Yeah.
And like with Springsteen, there's like a yearning, and there's a sort of like a hopeful quality where you're like, man, I really hope that guy's dreams don't get crushed. That's I feel like the subtext of hearing a Bruce Springsteen song is like, you know what, dude, we're rooting for you, man. I really
Yeah.
hope it works out for you. But you do not get the sense that his heart has already been crushed. You know what I mean? It's like he might still get out with his innocence. That's I
Yeah.
think how I feel about Springsteen. With Petty, it's like this guy has some lifelong heartbreak happening. Like it's here to stay.
Yeah.
And I admire that, and I admire like his commitment to that, and how much there's like people use this word a lot, and it's trendy, and I don't like it for that reason. But I do think that there's a vulnerability to Tom Petty's vocal expression
Yeah.
that is like not self-pitying, and it's not a trick, and he's like it's not a move, it's just there.
Yeah.
It's just constantly there. And I think that gives his voice a lot of its power. And I think he's sort of like an expert in using that. He's like one of these guys who sort of figured out how to manipulate that. I think is especially well.
And again, like you said, pretty early on, he got that pretty early on, and I think he was, obviously songwriter, but I think he was a vocalist, really a true vocalist, which is different from a singer sometimes, but a true vocalist right from the outset, right? Like he just got that. He knew how to do that and how to tap into what he was feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about the song. We've been, the reason we connected was all through a mutual acquaintance, Eric Senich, who runs the main contributor to the Van Halen news desk and runs
but
Books on
also
Rock.
one of the world's great music nerds.
Oh, 100%.
That he gives the music nerds a good name.
And just a great guy too, just a phenomenal guy to talk to. I'm going to put my head like, Kev, you got to listen to this song that this guy's done, this version of Listen to a Heart. I'm like, okay, well, I'll throw it on. And straight away, I'm like, oh, this is not at all what I was expecting.
Yeah.
So I've no background. I don't know. I'm 50 this year. I don't know what glitch rock is. I've never heard of this term before, right? And so it shouldn't, like I was listening to that, this shouldn't necessarily be my bag. But I found that there's almost like a straight line musically between you and Tom Petty. And it's that sort of, I think it's that, again, we use this word a lot with Tom Petty, it's that sincerity that I find completely compelling. And I believe every word you sing in on the whole album, and it's not affected and it's not put on. That's you coming across, and I feel that connection. So tell me why you picked Tom Petty as the one cover version on the album, and specifically why was it Listen to Her Heart?
Thanks, man. Thanks for all of that. One thing I learned as I was becoming a singer and taking vocal lessons and all that stuff, one thing I started doing was I was just going to karaoke by myself.
Yeah.
And I would go to karaoke bars during the day where you could get a private room, and it would be like the dead time and you could get a good deal on it. And I was just going to these karaoke rooms by myself to practice because I live in New York. So if I did it in my apartment, I was like self-conscious that the neighbors would hear and shit like that.
Right.
And also if you work in your own apartment, it's like too easy to get distracted. It's if you're like paying for the room, you have to use the time effectively because you're paying for it. But I found some spots where like the daytime karaoke rate was cheaper than a rehearsal studio. So I was going to these karaoke rooms, and a big part of my training was like just seeing what karaoke songs I thought I could do.
Yeah.
And there were a bunch of songs that I wished I could do, or songs that I felt I understood, but I just couldn't sing. Like, you know, there's any number of Guns N' Roses songs that mean a lot to Out to Get Me by Guns N' Roses. It means a lot to me. Can we curse on this podcast?
100%.
Okay, cool. So the way Axl Rose says "I'm fucking innocent" on that song is one of my favorite lyrics of all time, because like he says it with so much attitude that it's like no innocent man would ever say that. There's like a level of hostility that is just like makes it seem like you must have done something. But it's like such a cool, just like rebellious vibe. I'm fucking innocent.
Yeah.
I would love to have been able to kill that song in karaoke, but like it just doesn't sound good when I do it. Or like any number of Queen, basically any Queen song. You know, Queen's one of my favorite bands of all time, but like, you know, weight classes exist for a reason, and Freddie Mercury is a heavyweight and I am not. You know what I mean? That's just not my weight. I should not be punching in that ring. You know what I mean? For whatever reason, there were a bunch of Tom Petty songs that I could do. And I'm not saying that he's not a good singer. It's not like, for whatever reason, those songs in that range and that the emotional requirements and the range of the notes, I could do them in a way that I didn't sound like I could do Out to Get Me. So that sort of narrows it down a little bit. So, and then it becomes like, which Tom Petty song, you know?
Yeah.
And there are a bunch that I love, but I felt like Listen to Her Heart, there were a few things I liked about it. One, it's not one of the mega hits. It's not like covering Free Fallin'.
Yeah.
You know, it's like sort of the hit behind the hit. You know, I feel like it hasn't been so covered and so played that people don't hear it anymore. Like, there's some songs that have been done so much that as soon as they go on, people are just like, I know what that is. Then they stop paying attention. It did not have that quality. And then two, I liked how little it is. Like, I believe there are some songs that are just little songs that are like, they don't have a huge message. They're not like, they don't have the anthem quality. You know, I think like within the Tom Petty body of work, American Girl is not a little song.
Right.
Like, American Girl has this sort of mythical power. There's something happening there that's intense. The ending is like super powerful. It like builds to something. It closes out the album that it's on. You're wondering a little bit if the girl's dead. It's not little, right? It has this like cinematic power.
It's a big idea, that song, right? It really is.
It's called American Girl. Yeah, it's like thematic. I wanted to do a little one. And to me, Listen to Her Heart felt little. And that's not a slight. It's just like saying like, sometimes you're really in the mood for the little version of the candy bar. Sometimes you want like the fun size Snicker, not the normal Snickers, you know? So it had that quality that I liked. And then lastly, I wanted to be able to find an angle on it. And the thing that I thought would be cool would be, I mean, I knew I needed to change it. Like, I knew I needed to change it because I'm not equal to Tom Petty. I think Tom Petty is like a better singer than I am. And so if I just do a version of his song where I'm trying to be equal, it's going to be worse.
Yeah.
Because I am not equal. So I knew I needed to change it. So one thing I felt like I could inject into this song was the sense that like, we're saying the girl in this song has to listen to her heart, right? We're saying we're going to let her decide who's the right guy here. I think it's going to be me, but we're going to let her listen to her heart. And I was like, I like that. It's a good message. But like, what do we do if she listens to her heart and then the message is just like totally bewildering? like what if she listens to her heart and then it just ends up being this like totally confusing, nonverbal message that is just like a blast of like confusion. You know what I mean? Like, what if like that's what happens sometimes if you really listen to your heart. Like, sometimes it's fucking weird and confusing. So I just like that idea. I was like, what do we do then? So on a sonic level, I'm good at making stuff that sounds like that. Like, I've gotten good at making the musical equivalent of like, what the fuck.
Right.
And so I just thought it would be cool if I did listen to her heart, And then the whole second half of that song is like, you know, we're listening. It's like, we said we got to listen. Now we're going to listen. And by the end, you're just like, I don't know if that was a good idea. You know what I mean? Like, we said we were going to listen to her heart, and now we did. I mean, it's almost like I kind of wanted it to be like when you go see a movie with your friends, and it's like, let's say you rent The Shining, and you're like, oh, it's a scary movie. That'll be fun. We're just going to watch a scary movie. And then by the end of The Shining, you're like, what happened? Like, what does it mean? Like, what now? What do we do? Like,
why do I feel this way now?
Yeah, exactly. I kind of wanted it to be like, what if we listen to our heart and that's how we feel?
Yeah.
So I felt like I could do that. I know how to do that. I'm coming from a place of true admiration for Tom Petty, and like I don't think I'm like, you know, making fun of his idea or like disrespecting his idea really. But I also feel like I'm admired enough that I feel like I can also do a new thing with it. And I just felt like that was my this felt like a way for me to just express how my mind works with the Tom Petty source material.
But that's what I think that cover versions often get wrong, though, right? Is they don't, to cover something straight, you know, like I think, was it Faith No More did Easy? I think they covered Easy, right? They did it almost note for note. It's like, okay, but then I'll just go listen, like you said, I'll just go listen to the original then, because that's, there's no
I don't really
there.
understand that. Like, also Faith No More covered War Pigs by Black Sabbath on The Real Thing. And there's a part in the original War Pigs where Tony Iommi plays a guitar solo, and then there's like two different versions of the solo happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And like the left headphone and the right headphone like diverge. And their cover recreated that. And like, if I saw like a band do that live, I would be like, oh, that's fucking cool that they studied it that hard. Yeah. But I just do not understand the point of putting it on a record.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's cool that they nailed it, but I just feel like, also, that's a long record already. You know what I mean? That's like a hour plus album. I'm just like, why do we need to do that again?
Well, the opposite end of that is Cake's version of it, right? Which is phenomenal. Which just takes it and changes the mood of it completely. Right. Which again, that's what you've done with this song. Like I said, that's where I think when I'm listening to a cover version, I want to feel like the singer or the person who's covering it gets the song, but they're inhabiting it and they're pushing out whatever's inside through that lens, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that sounds a bit pretentious, but you've got to sort of get into the bones of it and understand the song and then just sing it the way you're going to sing it. So you've changed this song completely. Like I said to you offline, you know, I can see, I don't know if you've had any sort of comments on the video about from a purist standpoint. I know there are a lot of people who will have a hard time listening to this because it's so radically different.
I've gotten some comments where people are like, I couldn't listen to the end because it got too weird.
Right.
It's not even clear to me that they're pissed off about the Tom Petty part. Like, it just
like, the end of the song.
Just the end of the song itself is like difficult to listen to. So I've gotten that. Me and the producer had a fight about it when I originally did it. The producer was like, the end is too noisy. Like, we gotta cut it early. And I was like, I don't know, man. All the other songs in this album are so tight, and I feel like I was so disciplined, and everything is so catchy that I want there to be one song that's like fucked up. And he was like, I get it, but we can't do that. It's just too harsh. And he won. The version on the album, I mean, let me be clear. The version on the album is still fucked up. Like, it gets noisy. It's hard to listen to, but it ends earlier than my original version. But for the music video, I used my original version that has the full noise assault. In fact, I wanted to get the full version mastered because I knew I might want to do something like this. So like the producer won the argument. We picked this shorter version he did. That went to the master. I was like, wait a minute. I also want the guy to master my original version. But the producer was like, I didn't even mix that. I don't even have a version of that to send to him. So I had to, on my own in GarageBand, take the version my producer made and then like crossfade into some earlier shit demo I had.
Really?
Just so the master would get something. And if you listen very, 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 very carefully to the version in the music video, there's a moment right when it goes past what's on the album that you can sort of hear an edit like right at the moment when the music
Okay.
video starts to go for longer than what the album version is, you can hear an edit because the producer wouldn't even send the master a version. I had to make my own like
Wow.
low quality edit just to get it to the mastering engineer. I do think my producer's name is Jeff Stanfield. I admire his judgment. I've worked with him again. We're working on new stuff now.
Yeah.
I admire his judgment, but I just had this crazy notion that like someday I might want to have the longer, worse assault.
Yeah. So, again, like I said, you've changed the sonics of the song. Obviously, you've not monkeyed around. Well, there is a little bit where you change a little bit of with the lyric because you cut off I think it's the second chorus, right? You drop it out before you go into that outro. But like I said, I think actually it's a fairly faithful vocal. You're following the melody. You're not completely altering the melody, but it's over top of this great octave synth bass.
Yeah,
And is
yeah,
that
yeah.
I'm assuming it's a drum machine. It's not that's not live
It's
drum, right?
it's multiple layers.
Okay.
There's some drum machine. There's also some unlicensed samples in there that I
Okay.
can't really say what they are because they're unlicensed. But it's multiple layers of percussion happening. All of it's artificial though. There was no real drummer on the song.
Yeah, and it's got that great because what I always like because I've listened to New Order and a whole bunch of electronica bands back in my youth, and it's funny that you can still make a song swing even if it's programmed right, and it's still got that swing to it.
Yes, that's largely because of the unlicensed drum samples. Some of my drum samples had some pretty funky grooves happening on that.
Right.
So even though I mangled them and I do think I did creative stuff. I don't think that I just stole drum beats and then copied and pasted it in. I like manipulated the footage in a way that I think counts as being creative, but I did not license it. So, so some of the swing is there. Some of the swing is from that. But it's also true there were drum machines. Prince said that the reason he liked the Lynn drum machine so much was that it had its own funny time. It wasn't like perfectly mechanistic, especially when it would do the like triplet feel stuff, like like those on any Prince track that put the drum machine super forward. Anytime it does like a trill or like a triplet or something, you can hear that it has this sort of weird robotic cool swing thing. It would like not what a person would do, but it's not totally quantized either. There is a weirdness there.
Well, it's almost because every performer has his own thing, right? You have your own vibrato when you play, when you sing.
Right.
Like there's just those characteristics. So it's kind of nice that those filter through. A little bit of trivia, and I don't know if you know this: the hand claps in the Lynn drum, the original sample, was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers provided.
No, really?
Yeah, that's
I
all.
did not know that.
It was a backstage thing. The guy who made it said, "I need these hand claps." I'm like, all right. So that's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
So what that guy? What's his name? Robert Lynn.
Roger,
right?
I think it is. Yeah.
So he was just like hanging out with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. He was like, I need to sample a clap, and it was them.
It was them, yeah.
Oh man, I did not know that.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
That's mind blowing that I learned that by coming on this podcast. I love that. I love that. That's amazing.
So I was going to say, back to the song though too, because there's the bit where it cuts to the bridge, and I love how greasy that low end drop is because it's almost like it's a tape winding down because it drops, it goes into the lower key. Super, super cool. I love that sort of the sonic of that. You know which bit I'm talking about, right?
On which song?
On Listen to Her Heart.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where it goes into the bridge where you've got that sort of, it's like a, it's like, that's the only way I can describe it. It's like a tape machine sort of, you get that kind of drop into, and she can't move. So again, super cool. And then you get, we get the, like I said, the fucked up, weird outro bit, but there's some killer shreddy guitar in there, which just takes you completely by surprise again. And it's almost kind of got that, like, there's definitely, I can hear Eddie Van Halen's influence in a lot of what you play.
I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I did take a lot of guitar lessons before I got fully sucked into doing weird glitchy bullshit.
Yeah.
And I did for a long time care about like, being able to play straight or being able to shred or whatever. And I do, it's hard for me to resist demonstrating that. Like there is a part of me that was still like, why we took all those guitar lessons, right? It was so that we could show off. And there's a part of me that like can never fully resist sticking that somewhere, you know? So thanks, man. I'm glad you appreciate it. I do feel I have a a level of confidence in my guitar playing that is just like so different than my confidence as a singer. Like I have to be so not ambitious with what I do vocally because
Okay.
I'm still I started like as a guitar player, I was like the kind of teenager who just practiced a lot and I sort of like put in the time a long time ago and
Yeah.
like built up this basic like athletic it's there.
Yeah.
It's just there. You know what I mean? And so I can sort of push and I can fall back on that and I can challenge myself and like even for shit that I almost can't play, I can kind of fake it. There's like all kinds of stuff I can do as a guitar player where I'm like I can get away with all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And I didn't care about singing until much later in life. So I don't have the same sort of like easy ability to just be like, you know, even if my voice is a little, if my throat's a little sore, I know how to get through the show.
Yeah.
I don't have that. Like if my voice is a little sore on the day of the show, I'm like, I'm fucked. It's over for me. It's over. You know?
Right.
So like what I do as a singer, I have to make sure like the key is in my key. I know what my highest note is. Anytime
Yeah.
I write any song, I know what the highest note I have to sing is. I have to make sure it's like a step and a half below my high note so that no matter what I can hit it. You know, I really like I sort of designed everything I ever have to sing so that it's like not going to expose my limitations. But as a guitar player, I'm like, I've been playing guitar for so long, like, let's find out what the limitations are. Like, let's see what happens if I go beyond the limitations. So I feel like there is a kind of bizarre opposite vibe where like me as a singer, I'm like one of these guys in one of these punk bands where it's like you're just not trying to show off at all. You're just trying to like play the character and get it right. And there's like a dignity in sticking to the basics and showing respect for the basics. And then as a guitar player, I'm just like
rules are off.
Yeah, it's just like let's try to break shit. You know what I mean?
Well, that was the thing on Wildflowers, right? That was the last column on the chart. So we've got the drums done, the vocals are done, everything else is done. The last chart was Bugs Wydell's "Fuck Shit Up." What can we do to just change something in this song just to make it a little bit more interesting, right? So
yeah, exactly.
It's always a good attitude to have somewhere, I think. But I think
exactly, yeah. I think it's good to have both attitudes on the track. Like I agree.
I think you got a great voice, like, and that's always something for me is make or break straight away. I don't know about you, like, I can't listen to Pearl Jam because there's just musically they are phenomenal. There's just something about Eddie Vedder's voice that doesn't chime with me, so it's just lights out straight away, right? So I've got to like the voice first and foremost. I think did a great job, but yeah, I mean, talk about the guitar on this album. I mean, there's guitar all this. I was listening to, which is the one, I Know the Feeling. Yeah, it sounds more like because hang on, is that synth? No, that is guitar. He's just sent that through God knows how many effects units or pedals. Like,
yeah, thanks. Yeah, the solo on I Know the Feeling was actually double tracked.
Okay,
so I'm playing it twice with different effects, but I'm playing the same thing.
Okay,
and one of the effects is like a very unstable that like you play a note and it kind of just implodes.
Okay,
so and it's impossible to know like which notes are gonna be okay and which notes are going to sort of just like glitch out.
Right.
But so I did one performance with that effect and then I just played it again with an effect that was like just sort of a trashy distortion. So it sounds kind of ratty, but the notes are there. So
yeah.
Sometimes it's like you have both and then sometimes you have both, but one of them is like failing. And that's part of why it's like you kind of don't know what you're hearing, but it's there. Right. You know, anytime I ever play guitar, I'm a little bit trying to have it just be like, this is my chance to be really, like we were talking about Mike Patton or Faith No More before.
Yeah.
Like Mike Patton as a vocalist can kind of do anything at any time. He can play any character. He can make all kinds of sounds where you like don't know if it's a human voice. You don't know who he is. Like he can sort of do anything. I cannot do that as a vocalist. The best I can do as a vocalist is to have it just sound like, oh, okay, that's Ivan. He must really mean what he's saying. That's like best case scenario.
But that's man, I think as a vocalist, if you can get that across, then you've won, right? You don't.
Oh, thanks. No, I'm not
you know what I mean?
crying about it. Thank you. I agree. I'm like I know that's my role, but as a guitar player, I do try to have it be like, you know, how can I be a little more mysterious, or how can I be like how can I push the form a little bit more? One thing I never do in Cyberattack is like really fuck with the production style of the vocals. Like
Right.
it's always kind of just sounds like a guy singing. Now, my producer does all kinds of cool little things to make it sit in the mix, and there's
Yeah.
EQ and there's reverb. There's all kinds of pro shit happening, but we don't do like radio voice or walkie-talkie voice or weird auto-tune voice or
Yeah.
alien voice. Like I want the backing track to be as like Looney Tunes as possible, but I want the voice to still sort of just sound like, oh, that must be who that guy is. It sounds
Well,
like there's that guy.
and I think that would get you'd risk overcomplicating it if you did that, right? Because I think that when you have that clean melody in the vocal, it allows that sort of the chaos
Yeah,
that's going
I
on with
agree.
some of the other parts to really sort of shine, right? It's you know, you don't bury the lead, you know. So
Exactly. I agree. I totally agree. Especially since I'm like writing the lyrics and everything. I kind of want that part of it to be like the familiar part.
yeah,
It's like you're hearing this track and you sort of don't know who's playing it, and it sounds a little bit like this hyper video game that's like failing.
yeah,
But the vocal is sort of like, well, we could just go with that guy probably. You know, that's a little bit what I'm trying to do.
right. And like for my listeners, the album Hard Feelings, which I was going to ask about whether that's a little slight nod back to Hard Promises. Maybe it's not. It's just a coincidence, I assume. But to me, it was like when I started listening to it again, it was something. It's a style that I hadn't listened to before, but I immediately just got it because I could hear so many things that I listened to growing up in it. And so like I'm just gonna throw a bunch of bands at you and
Okay.
you can go, oh, I don't know. So like Underworld, Ben Folds, Squeeze, Foo Fighters, Queen, Talking Heads, Sad Cafe, especially some of those like minor changes. Soundgarden, like some of the stuff with like the phrasing on the guitars
Uh-huh.
and the weird chord changes to Petty, of course, you know. So there's all these
Yeah.
different influences. Like I get this, I know what this is. So it's wrapped in this weird, glitchy electronic kind of skin, but underneath it, these are just rock and roll and pop songs. So I totally get this. I understand what this is.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I appreciate that. All of the songs started as me like strumming an unplugged electric guitar
Right.
and like playing the chord progression and singing it into my phone.
Right.
Like every one of these songs, there's like a bad voice memo on my phone. There's just me strumming and singing it. And it's not even an acoustic guitar. It's an
Just the electric.
unplugged electric guitar, which sounds dumber. Like
Yeah.
an unplugged electric guitar just sounds completely not serious. And it's like me in my apartment, so I'm like trying to be quiet because I'm self-conscious anyway. So these voice memos like sound real bad, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to me, that's the test. It's like if I can make a voice memo, if I can play the song and make a voice memo out of it, and you find yourself almost even kind of listening to the song and like getting past the fact that it's a piece of shit voice memo, like that's what I'm trying to do. If
Yeah.
I can make a song that I think a little bit holds its own in that format, then I'm like, okay, this is worth investing in and finding a way to make it sound cooler than a voice memo. But I do try to write everything on the level of just like, are the chords cool? Are the melodies cool? Are the lyrics cool?
Right.
And if you can make those work, then it's almost like you're just covering that song. It's like you wrote the song and it's just chords, melodies, lyrics,
Yeah.
and some sort of rhythm. And now it's like, well, if we had to cover it, how would we cover it? And I cover everything the way I covered that Tom Petty song. So that's why my album sounds like that.
Super cool. So is that, do you start with music then? Like, because I know that I'm a hobbyist songwriter and a lot of my friends are songwriters. And so there's that conversation. Do you start with a melody? Do you start with a line? Do you start with a, like, is it, what's your go to usually?
I have like a bunch of unfinished music things that are sort of cooking that are just music and melodies. And then I have a bunch of unfinished, like unused titles and ideas for lyrics. And they're sort of like also crying out for me to finish them, and they're like over here.
Yeah.
And I'm basically always trying to see like, do any of those unfinished lyrics, could any of them fit with any of those unfinished songs?
Yeah.
And basically I can't ever finish the song until I find one from each category that kind of fit. And I'm like, ooh, thank God. You know, it's like I can write one more song now. I have one other song I might be able to write. And then as soon as I'm done with that one, I'm like, now I guess I'm back to being stuck with a bunch of unfinished bullshit.
Well, it's like, you know, it's the Bono line from which song on Actung Baby, every artist is a cannibal, every poet is a thief, right? It's that thing of, well, if you're cannibalizing from yourself, every songwriter does that. Well, I had this line, it didn't work, or I cut this verse out of this song because it was too long. But that line, I'm going to keep that because I know that'll work somewhere eventually.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you quickly. Nothing about this has been quick. I realize because again, like I said
No,
to you before,
loving
and
it. I'm loving it.
I love putting a framework together for a quote unquote interview, and it just ends up being a chat about music because this
Of
is I like
course.
nerding out about music. But so you came, like you said, you came into Tom's music around about Full Moon Fever and Freefall, and I think there's always an interesting conversation around how you view music of an artist you like from the point you got into them and everything they released after, but then going back and listen to the stuff that had already been out. So when you go back and listen to Damn the Torpedoes or Hard Promises or Southern Accents or even the first album, what's your relationship to that music, and has that changed as you've got older? I think you said, like, you became a Tom Petty fan later, but what was that like going back and rediscovering some of those older albums? Well, listen to Our Hearts off the second album. So
That's a good question. I mean, I always respected it, but I guess I felt a little bit like now I know what I'm watching for. I don't
okay,
know. It's sort of like if you watch a movie and you're not really getting it, and then at the very end you're like, "Oh, I think I get it now," but I got to rewatch the whole movie so that I can follow it this time.
yeah,
I felt a little bit like that. Like I always admired some of those other songs, but once I sort of figured out like this is what Tom Petty means to me.
yeah,
He's the sort of guy who's like always on the verge of tears, but he's holding it back.
yeah.
Like that's basically what Tom Petty means to me. He's like he's on the verge of tears, but he's holding it back. And there's layers to that, but that's like the basically what I think is like his high card is his ability to work with that as like the starting point.
Yeah.
I was able to then re-listen to everything and be like, I already like this, but now I'm liking it also as like a demonstration of that quality, or like I'm you know what I mean? So that's sort of how I felt. It basically like everything I already liked, I liked more, or I liked it a little with a little bit more of a personal connection.
It's that you liked it and then you got it. Because I had the same thing once I heard Wildflowers and got through Wildflowers, and just that's when I sort of fell. That was the tipping point for me. Then you go back and you listen to Hard Promises and some of the stuff from even Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, and you think, yeah, this guy's in serious pain here.
Yeah,
it's not I don't know why I didn't catch that before, but it's clear, it's right there on the page, like it's just so I always find that too. When I said, I think it's that thing of I get into it. Well, I talked about because I'm a huge Queen fan as well. I have another podcast about Queen, right? Which I'll have to have you on maybe. And it's that thing. But I grew up with Queen, so I had all the albums from the get go. So I never had that. I never had to go back and rediscover because it was just part of who I was.
I understand.
Part of my identity. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, the Queen's a good example because like everyone could shred so much, and there was like so many virtuoso displays happening like nonstop that there is a kind of like invincibility to it that I think is like fundamentally different than the appeal of Tom Petty.
100%. Yeah.
Like Tom Petty is very good, and vocally I don't think you ever hear him stumble, but he's just like not. The position is not a position of invincibility,
It's accessibility. It's the opposite, really, right?
Yeah.
It's like you listen to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and it's funny because as a drummer, I think, well, I can play that. That's easy. And then when you sit down, it's like, oh, actually, Stan's doing this weird little hat lift, and he's not coming in right on the beat. It's like, oh yeah, no, that's a little bit tougher, and it's consistent. So he's doing it deliberately. And same with Steve Ferroni with Fault Lines trying to play that freaking bossa nova on the ride. I'm like, I know the notes, but I can't play it that way,
Yeah.
So it's that sort of, it sounds simple. It's like the Beatles. It sounds simple, but it's still pretty accomplished, but it feels accessible. So
yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so let's wrap things up. What do you got? So when's the new album coming out?
Oh, good question. Very scary question. My current plan is to record it in September of this year.
Okay.
I don't know how long it's going to take me to nail the vocals. It takes me a long time to nail the vocals. I get very uptight and like dysfunctionally perfectionistic about it. So I'm sure I can finish recording everything else in September of this year. Vocals are a total question. Even if it goes fast, that probably means the new record's coming out next year. 2024 would be my guess.
Okay. But until then, everyone can definitely check out your current album, Hard Feelings, online everywhere where you get your music, I assume.
Yeah, it's on all my streaming platforms. Also, I have a website that's just cyberattack.world.
Yeah.
You might not have known that you can have a website that's .world, but you can, and they're much cheaper than .com. So I bought .world. Cyberattack.world. It's like pretty dumb website, but it's got links to all the other stuff you're going to need.
It's a great website. What are you talking about? It's lean. It brings across the vibe. That's what I love about it. It's like there's not like 50 pages about us and my bio and here's some photos. No, it's just like, hey, deal with it. This is this glitchy, weird sort of image on the front. I totally dig it, man.
I'm so glad. That's a huge relief because I haven't updated it in a while. So I'm glad.
And I would tell my listeners, so like if you like huge hooks, if you like melody, you're gonna love this album. You can dance to it. The harmonies in it are great, but it's deceptively dense. I found after like the first time through, I'm like, well, this is all pop music. This is great. Second and third listens, you're like, actually, no, I got to sit down and really pay attention to some of this stuff because there's a lot more going on than you necessarily think. So it's packed with different ideas and different angles, and like I said, all these different influences that I just totally dig. I totally dig it, man. And I think. So I just bought it on Bandcamp, which again, people go to Bandcamp because then Ivan gets the money there. It's not you're not getting 0.001% from Spotify.
Dude, I didn't even realize that was you. I sent a little email to a guy named Kevin who bought my album. I was like, oh, dude, I didn't know that was you. Then I would have made the message much more personal.
No, totally cool. But like I said in the message,
thanks for running the record. That was today. That was this morning, right?
It was earlier this morning. Yeah, and I mean that's that thing of you should buy it. We can all stream music, but when it's independent artists, just go buy the music, please. It does make a difference. So
I appreciate that. And listen, dude, I mean, thank you for listening to the album as intensely as you did and like just giving it so much attention. Like when you work on something like this and you spend as much time on it and you like obsess over it as much as I do, the whole time you're just hoping that like somebody somewhere will listen to it with that kind of attention. Even more than you hope that people will like it. You just hope that like people will stare at it long enough to even notice any of what you did. And so I'm really grateful that you did that. And I just want to thank you. And also for having me on the podcast. This has been a real blast.
Definitely, man. And like I said, I this is what I do for my podcast, right? I do listen to songs, listen like a musician. It's like you were talking about earlier. You can find something in a song that makes you go, that's kind of cool. Even if it's just a 3-second drum fill or a weird phrasing or something, there's always something in there. And one thing that I've got 6 pages of notes, which I'm not going to go through all of them, but that line in, I think it's Invincible, lost touch with all my enemies. I thought that's so fucking clever because I lost touch with all my friends. Well, that's a pretty easy line to write. Lost touch with all my enemies. That's a clever line, man. I really like that.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that song is sort of about the dangers of like not being up against anything,
right?
You get sort of soft if you're just sort of coasting along and it's too easy. So thanks, man. It's been fun doing the podcast, but it's also just fun being music nerds with you because you really you're good at it. You're good at being a music nerd.
Oh, thank you.